We get to directly ask questions, concerns, if we haven't gotten it today. You know, specifically for generative and transmedia, it's pretty intensive, isn't it, Roy?
Yeah, it
You
can
make people do.
it can be pretty intense, but like Brad was mentioning before, um, I don't think I mentioned this during the talk, but I taught myself how to code while I was at Art Center. And I kind of like pieced it together from different lectures and things that I just watched online because there wasn't really any resource for graphic design and code at the time. And so I think the way that I'm approaching it in the class is like, I try to make it as easy as possible. And then all of a sudden it's like week 12 hits and students are like, oh, I didn't realize I know so much now. So maybe the weekend workshop will have the same effect.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also the way Roy teaches it too. You know, again, you know, it's kind of amazing to see the students in his class really pick things up so quickly. And it's how he structures things, and it's how he, you know, there's a nice logical progression to the exercises in the class.
Mm-hmm.
What's hard to know though, like sometimes you need to have a little time for that to be internalized, you know?
Yeah.
And to do it back to back to back over the course of a few days consecutively, I don't know if you'd be able to retain as much information.
Right.
Just from a learning standpoint.
Well, Roy can also do this. He's, like you said, Brad, Roy has streamlined it for online learning too. He definitely has done that. If he can teach our students online generative type and apply it to transmedia, then I think educators, you have a better understanding of typography. You should be able to, you know, be just as, I know technology is always a roadblock for me. Like when I have to tell you, I'm so happy I'm not a type designer. I thought being a letterpress printer was quite the nerd. And, you know, I still like setting in metal type, but once I started meeting type designers, I said, okay, that's a whole nother level that I don't have the patience. I don't have the patience for that. But I really think though, that as educators, you're able to perhaps, even in an online course, you know, it can be operated in a different, maybe I'm, you know, at least you know typography, right?
You know, Brad, on that note of retaining information, I used to program way back when, before my bachelor's in design, which is ancient history, but I kind of remember some things, and maybe 2 consecutive weekends as opposed to like 3 days. So just a week to kind of do some homeworks, you know, make sure like think in that deeper brain, and then
that's it.
Well, there are
the
many
exercises,
ways.
the homework, and then the retention in parts of your brain that are retaining information. I think that's important from a cognitive standpoint. And then, you know, what Roy always tells me too, and Roy, you can speak to this, is that, you know, the students tend to try to exceed expectations every week, you know, and Roy and I, we talk a lot after class, just exchange. I mean, that's the beauty of teaching together with someone that you know pretty well. And Roy would always tell me that the students would kind of bring in extra work. They'd have time to work on things. And then what they would always do too is have all these questions in terms of how they can push things a little bit further. So having that gap of time to do the exercises, retain the information, and then come back and do it again would be a logical way to approach it, I think. And this kind of plays off of the way Roy was talking about input versus output. The output could be something physical. You created a physical, immersive, interactive experience. It's not necessarily limited to your screen on your laptop.
Right.
You know, so I think, you know, maybe something that could evolve into a kind of a physical classroom exchange of information would open up more possibilities in terms of output.
Yeah, we'll do something. Go ahead, Juan.
Yeah, thanks. To me, a letter to Santa Claus would be definitely doing that. That would be amazing. But also, you, Roy, mentioned a couple of sites. I don't know if they are platforms or what, to explore, to play with it. Maybe you can give us today just a few hints of where to start playing with something like this, because that would probably open up our minds. And then when that happens, we're a little bit more, I don't know, immersed, I would say. Would that be possible?
Yeah, totally. I think the best
Yeah.
place, the number one place for students that I send them for learning is a YouTube channel called The Coding Train. That's created by an educator named Daniel Schiffman, who teaches at NYU. And he's kind of one of the big, he's done a lot to really push the kind of tutorial and education parts of processing in P5.js. So he has 2 intro series of videos, one on processing and one on P5.js. And he also does like weekly coding challenges for himself where people will, he has a Discord channel for anyone that's familiar with Discord or a server. And so like in the server, he'll take requests for like weekly coding channel challenges. So over the course of the last, I would say like 5 to 7 years, his YouTube channel has just become this really, really great library of all these different kinds of programming things. So like sometimes, like last term, a student was asking about creating a Space Invaders type game, and he had done a Space Invaders demo. Or another term, someone was asking about animating type using an image as a reference, and he had done a demo on that. So it's a really, really great resource. Outside of that, I would say the other thing I would recommend is a book called Processing. I think it's, I don't know if I have it here somewhere.
Thank you, Dean.
Okay, processing, okay.
Wait, hold it up there again.
I can type it into the chat too.
Oh yeah, type it into the chat. It's interesting.
There are 2 other really good books too. One is called Form and Code. Form and Code. I think it's authored by Casey Reese, right, Roy?
Yeah, and Chandler McWilliams.
And the other is Generative Design by Julia Laub and Benedict Gross. Is that correct, Roy?
Yeah.
Yeah, those are really good ones too.
Yeah, I think those are, it's always good to start, from reading and then see if you can wrap your head around it, something like that. I love the fact that you showed both the work of Muriel Cooper and Saul LeWitt.
Yeah, I mean, his series of incomplete cubes is something that every design student should study, especially as we kind of move into more systems design as opposed to crafting, kind of singular artifacts. Roy's reference, when I was auditing Roy's class over the summer, after class, I'd email him, Roy, can you just send me a PDF of all the references you brought into play?
Right.
And because that really widens a student's frame of reference and perspective when it comes to this stuff. It's been here for a while. And there are all these really amazing projects that cross over from design to art to architecture that have utilized computational design. And once they're exposed to it, they're kind of like, they just want to go deeper into it.
Roy, if you can send us, if you have a list of bibliography of your references,
I can send.
If you send it, we'll post it on the HMCT website.
Okay, cool.
Under our resources.
Sounds
and
good.
then you can just download it. How's that? It'll be easier if there's one spot instead of Roy getting inundated with, emails, send me. So we'll just post that, okay?
Cool.
The HMCT website, Clifford can put in our address if you don't know it by now, how to reach the HMCT and under resources. So we'll post it so you can just, download it.
Thank you, Roy. Great. Thank you, Gloria.
Oh, thank you guys. I mean, for sharing, that's the whole point. So I think if there's any other questions, I mean, this is a difficult shift, I think, thinking about the concept of transmedia or generative type. Was talking with Dave Crossland about it too. It's interesting. Someone asked me, what's the difference between, and this is very different, variable type versus generative type.
Yeah.
Why don't you explain what the differences are? I mean, they're very different.
Yeah, totally. I think that's actually a question that a lot of students have been asking over the last couple of terms as variable fonts have become more popular, especially during the week when we're working on parametric type. I would say like the big question that students have is when we're learning the parametric type stuff, they're asking like, how is this different than variable fonts? And so variable fonts, for anyone that's like a font designer, might be familiar with the process. Basically, you have a series of masters that you're interpolating between. So you could go from like light to bold or black or something like that. But those are, the design space of that font is fixed. And so you can only move between all of those masters. Whereas when we're working with generative type and parametric type systems within code, we can go like really broad. We don't have masters that we're referencing. We have a piece of code that we're manipulating and changing. And so if it is a letter form and we are manipulating something like stroke weight, we can go really, really small, like sub-pixel size, to something that's incredibly large without having to have those two masters designed. So I would say, like, from a technical perspective, at least, that's like the big difference.
And can't generative type be reactive?
Yeah.
Just like you said,
yeah.
you can program it to react to weather.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
You can do that with variable fonts now too, actually.
You can?
Yeah, totally. So in CSS, there's ways of accessing the variable font information, and you can control. So if, for example, if a variable font file has an axis for stroke weight or slant or something like that, we would be able to change that through code in the browser now. So it's a relatively new thing that actually some of the, I believe Google Fonts had a typeface called Spectrum, I think it was called, that.
Yeah, he talked about Spectrum.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that was developed with a tool called Prototypo, I believe, or something like that. Anyway, it was an
or
old,
is it
like,
it's either Spectrum or Spectral.
Yeah, I think
one of the
but
two.
the site that they made, the specimen site, has like, it shows like animation of that variable font and stuff. And so the same thing that's driving that animation could be hooked up to like a data feed.
It's kind of interesting when you think of now, and if, of course, when we think of generative type, you're thinking of environmental, or, reactive or print work, but you're not talking about static. You can't be. Generative type can.
It seems like it wants to exhibit the same characteristics as perhaps even like a living organism, right?
Right.
And so, within that set of parameters that you design, any number of permutations can kind of occur. And it's a very kind of open-ended system. And I think that's maybe another way to look at it, an open-ended system for generative type versus a kind of closed system, as Roy mentioned, for variable type.
Yeah. And it's interesting because even companies, if you were here for Mike Abbing's talk from IBM, and he talked about, what he was talking about was flexibility, and what he was showing was generative type. He was showing type morphing into, many different configurations and still maintaining the brand, even though the object was changing. And this is the kind of future I think a lot of companies are looking for, whether it's in a social media environment or an actual physical environment now. How is your environment and your information reacting to you entering the environment? So,
Yeah, there's a famous quote by Hugh Dubberly, and he says that sensors in the environment will revolutionize the design process much more so than the personal computer. And we're just beginning to kind of lean into that future, kind of this post-internet future, where the internet itself and the idea of an interface won't necessarily be trapped behind glass.
Yeah.
And
but
then
the other thing that
anticipating how type might change in relation to that tectonic shift is really super exciting.
But the other thing Mike stressed, and I'm sure both you and Roy adhere to this, is you still understand how to use typography. What are the basic, precepts of good typography and good uses and what's appropriate, even if it's generative type, if it's interactive type, if it's transmedia. I think we still have to stress, okay, just because we can do this, let's just do it. I mean, that's unfortunate Mike was saying that a lot of designers come in and they might know these programs, Roy, but they know nothing about typography.
Yeah,
and
that was
shows.
I was just going to say, that was the one challenge when I was learning code. I really wanted a great resource that had the level of sophistication in terms of design that I was used to while I was a student at Art Center. But everything was like, here's an example of how to write a class in code, for example. And then either the thing that you make is like an alien that floats around the screen, or it's like, using some really weird type system, and you're like, there should be like more crossover between graphic design and this stuff, just so that it can, because I think that was the one thing that was hard with students when I was talking to them initially, like, why have you been afraid of type or code, and why haven't you really invested as much time in this? Because a lot of students get really excited about it after the class, and they keep bringing it into other classes. And I think the thing that was holding them back is, like you're talking about, a lot of the examples aren't super refined from a type from a type perspective, and they don't have a lot, you know, it's hard because sometimes people go really deep into the technical stuff and not as deep into the design, or vice versa. And so it's hard for one person to kind of find that balance between the two. And that's what we really stress in the class, I think.
I think that's, it's also, I mean, it's kind of why, you know, the class does resonate so much with our graphic design students that are interested. So a lot of the students we get in transmedia, we get a crossover from print to transmedia more than any other area. You would think interaction design to transmedia or motion to transmedia. No, it's print. And it's primarily the students that are really interested in print and typography. And I think when Roy teaches his Gen Type class, he's teaching it from the lens of a typographer or a graphic designer. And so he's teaching code from that lens, that perspective, as opposed to teaching from a computer science degree, where his visual sensibility, or his, you know, one's taste or visual sensibility isn't necessarily as sophisticated as a graphic designer who has dedicated his or her life to studying letter form design. So I think that's, it's who's teaching it and what their background is. I think that's another thing that was part of the reason that code-based graphic design didn't really catch on at Art Center, was kind of dying on the vine for a little while until Roy picked it up and really kind of invigorated it with new life.
I'm not quite sure how it's handled in other institutions too. Or, you know, are you finding it the same way that, you know, the graphic design and typography is kind of has to catch up a little bit and push their way into the coding world to bring the level of sophistication that we want now? You know, it's like we have to push our way in, and to really make it understood that it's important. And as it was said, you know, typography, it's everywhere, even more so now with display of information. So I agree. I think it has to start early. You have to make the young graphic design typography student not afraid of processing.
I'm wondering, on the subject of generative and code-based typography, do we know any other programs that go to kind of the level that Art Center goes, or anywhere close to that?
I've seen some work from students at MICA that's been pretty, I think they have a generative typography class that's taught as like the intro class, I believe, or intro to coding class. And some of the other educators I've connected with in Europe have also showed me some stuff, like one of the creators of Basil.js that I've been speaking with. I know the school he teaches at has some interesting work as well, but yeah, I think it's hard because even though this type of thing has been around for a while, it still feels relatively new and unexplored from a graphic design perspective.
Right.
So trying to build this community around it is something that, especially after we went remote and I was spending a lot of time in the office by myself, I was like, maybe I'll start reaching out to people to see if anyone wants to talk about the other stuff that they're teaching.
Students share a lot of, you know, between themselves, whether through Instagram or other, you know, dozen apps that are out there. And some students want to see what other students are doing, and they want to learn that kind of thing, you know, as they grow in their career. So if there was kind of more kind of presentation of, you know, what other people are doing around the world and what else can be done other than what's happening in the art, it may become somewhat of a kind of a new layer that everybody may be interested in.
Well, I have to say, I'm just going to promote it. I think Brad has developed an incredible program here. The transmedia program, the level of sophistication, it has been viewed by like the leaders in design, and they're like, we've never seen this level before. And you're right, it is starting to perhaps make its way through other programs, but not as intense or as at the level here. And again, it's incorporating the design principles and typography principles and the storytelling. That's the key that makes it so rich. You know, if you just do processing and generative type without the other graphic elements, well, it's generative type. Where does it fit? How does it become part of the greater cultural community too? So, but I'd love to know where other programs are.
Yeah, I think there have been other programs that have kind of started kind of like a transmedia track at Cranbrook Academy of Art, where I went to graduate school. They recently launched 4D design. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Cranbrook, and Miles and I were taking a look at their program, and we had met with Chris, I forget his last name, the former director of Cranbrook. He came to visit our classroom, and he was really excited about what he saw. And then we saw them start to kind of work with that in a graduate institution at Cranbrook. And that was the first graduate program that they had launched in over 40 or 50 years at Cranbrook. So it does feel like there's maybe something in the air, something going on. And I think, social media is certain types of certain outcomes within design are elevated by social media, things that move, things that are responsive, things that are dynamic. And so I see that as a kind of catalyst for promoting work that has a certain level of dynamism or kind of kinetic quality. So I think that's also another kind of factor in this. But again, I think that what prevents most programs from embracing code-based design is finding instructors that have a strong sense of code and instructors that also have a strong kind of graphic design sensibility, a strong foundation to kind of build off of or pull from. I think the thing at Art Center that the transmedia classes and the generative design classes benefit from is our typographic program. And I mean, of course I'm biased, I teach at Art Center, but it's so regimented, and there's such a strict logical progression to the type of work that you see. And there's an embedded intelligence within the systems thinking within our type program. And that systems thinking is something that's analogous to some of the things we like to do in generative design and in transmedia typography. So I think there's a kind of affinity there within our little microcosm. Maybe that's a reason that there's something kind of happening now that we're really proud to share.
I also think, and Pooja, some of you might be aware of it. We started it this last year where we have these educator fellows, and we had like David Wolski he was here for 10 days. We offer it, X amount of dollars. I think it was $2,500. And he came and he was allowed to observe and participate in any typography class here at Art Center, from the letterpress all the way into transmedia. So we'll probably, once we get back into the system again, offer that again. So, you kind of sit there and as an educator, you're watching someone else, you're going through the process, you're seeing how the crits are done, you're seeing how the program is run, and you can see, oh, here's a type 2 class, here's a, very early class, and then here's what happens in the the greater class. And yes, this is a conservatory school, and we have the luxury of having such a wonderful program here at Art Center. But a lot of times it's meant for people to take away, well, how can I compress this? Or what do I bring back to like a more limited program? And we'll offer that again, definitely, and people, we had a lot of applications. We still have 2 people who are still waiting to come when COVID's over. Unfortunately, they got their money and then COVID came and they didn't show up. So, but something like that, again, mentoring other educators, I think it's really important. Like, Brad going to, Cranbrook, to see what are other people doing. And it's easier in this virtual environment, but, that's another thing, is to put together, groups of, Roy, you can say who we should invite and have this kind of discussion, and people can totally present in a little more informal way where it's a really, very specific group that can say, this is how we teach and this is the kind of work that we do.
Since we're on the subject of reaching out now and thinking about what Roy was saying, and also the conversation we had with Tyrone on kind of reaching out to underserved communities and just broadening the level of access that everybody has to these kind of higher modes of thinking, making. I think if you guys are making programs, how about making something that lower schools can teach their students while they're at it? And so when they graduate and they're ready to go to colleges, they got some programming skills and to go. Just a thought, like to throw it out there.
Well, that's something I have to
They're
say.
already
That's
learning.
something
They're learning.
they're
code.
already learning code.
They're learning code already. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Like my
Grade
son, my son Joshua is upset because the fourth graders are learning code right now, and he's not. He's only in third grade. And so he really wants to learn that stuff, you know. And again, they're digital natives, you know. They're complete digital natives. That's their world. And so that intimidation factor that I know I have in relation to code, and to be quite honest with you, in sitting in Roy's class, like, it wasn't easy. The lectures were amazing, and I felt like I got a lot from that. But when it came to the exercises themselves, you know, I had to, you know, that didn't necessarily come easy, you know. So yeah, I think that an early, you know, STEAM education is important, and I think that within STEAM education, it's important for us to, you know, kind of work through certain gender biases when it comes to working with code and technology. You know, it is encouraged, you know, one gender is perhaps encouraged to work in that way and the other is perhaps discouraged. And that discrepancy is not healthy, you know, for these things that we like to build, that embraces a diversity of perspectives and points of view. We know that kind of diversity is what makes things much more interesting and much more vital. So to your point, you know, they are super interested in it at a young age, but again, there's systemic gender bias when it comes to working with technology. I've noticed that.
Maybe
And also socioeconomic bias too.
Sure,
just remember
for
that.
sure.
I mean, that has
access to the tools and access to a reliable internet connection is a problem. You know?
Maybe kind of empowering the art and design instructors at those levels to be able to tell the students that there is, you know, you don't have to study programming to become a programming kind of, you know, data processing nerd or something. You can become an artist and create technology or create art forms and maybe you can allow them to kind of open their minds before they kind of decide what tracks they want to follow. Maybe to help them make that connection might be something that we
Again, these are all things that I think the community, our type and design community can, you know, large organizations should be focusing on K through 12 because, you know, I don't want STEM to overtake STEAM because that's what's happening. And, you know, I mean, you know, that's something, you know, how can the higher education partner with, you know, the K through 12? I know Art Center is starting a program with K through 12 in terms of a mentorship program, because we're really trying to focus on local community to bring our local students into the world of art and design. And it starts with, you know, you got to get them in high school, you have to get them in middle school. Grade school, I'm not quite sure yet. It's a little bit difficult. I don't know how you handle it, Brad, a 9-year-old. I would not be that instructor for a 9-year-old. That's not me. Those of you who know me know I'm not even allowed to teach first-term students here at Art Center.
You know, at SNAP, we have a program called SNAP Design Academy, where it's a summer program, and we have students from all sorts of variety of colleges from different socioeconomic background. We choose 25 students to come in and learn how to use Snapchat and the augmented reality in the app program to create lenses and programs. And we've had a lot of good success on that, sending students out.
Yeah. Olga, what would you like to say something?
It's not actually a question, it's a reaction to your thought that grade school, probably you would not touch it. I want to tell you that before being a designer and typographer, I was a musicologist and finished with a very high degree in philosophical thoughts. And just because I couldn't find a job, I went to a daycare center, and I thought it would be the lowest point of my career. It was the most creative. There were people who were able to teach tiny children such basic skills that I ended up creating a pantomime play with a lot of, I played,
Oh,
I don't know,
Olga.
Mozart, and they danced minuet, and it was 4 years old, and I would never imagine, and I still think that is one of the highest levels. So if
Olga, I'm not saying I wouldn't teach. I think it's a great honor. Oh God, no. I was terrific in kindergarten. I'm a big believer in public education and starting young. I'm just saying I don't have the personality. That's what I meant. I don't have the personality. You know, it takes a lot of patience.
Patience, that's it. Patience.
That I noticed that if you are such a professional, because I have very, very high education with my conservator, and I went to a very low level, kind of tiny children, I really felt that I was professional. So I feel that those professionals like Lloyd, who have teaching experience, who are able to break things into small things, that you have this role to explain to us who studied, but maybe for Brad, for your son, it's easier than for us to learn that, right? So maybe if you use these skills of teaching, breaking things into small things, then we can handle it and we can apply it with all our knowledge.
Well, then on that note, what I'm going to suggest to Roy is when we do start our educator intensive in generative type, think of us as all 5-year-olds.
Yes.
Okay. On that note, I want to
Gloria, you nailed it. That's exactly what design is. That how we take complex information and we simplify it into something that even a 5-year-old understands. You nailed it.
There we are. So I'll await that.
There was a question that Milka asked, and I would be very, very intrigued about the answer. It's in the chat, or Milka, maybe you just want to post it here.
So I was honored to design the logo for Snapping, and I didn't realize what a monster it became when it was published, because once the logo was out there, different sizes and variables were out there. So to Gloria's point, at that time, I feel like as a designer, I couldn't dictate how small or how large this logo could go, and how the variability would affect the readability and legibility as it becomes smaller and larger. So my question is there an app out there, like the program that you were showing for the font, where it allows the word mark, not the typeface, but the word mark, because you have to modify the word mark, allows that variability and flexibility for it to be scaled without compromising its legibility and readability?
Oh, are you talking about a word mark, or are you talking about a logo? Are you talking about something that's an Illustrator file or
a word mark
file?
So a word mark would be a logo that is made out of letters. So you take
well, right. I think Dave,
so Milka, you're talking
that.
about how it might change in terms of weight or spacing by scale. Like when it's really small, you want to have a little bit more openness there. When it has larger scale, kind of the way that type is designed and type is current for display versus something that involves text. And it would seem, I mean, Roy, it would seem like some of the sliders and some of the ways that Roy students are adjusting those variables could also be utilized for some of those considerations too.
Yeah, there's one, I think a common thing that has been happening within brand studios recently is that part of a brand guidelines document that will be handed off would be a piece of software that could address something like that. So a lot of the generative design and type projects that you see coming from studios like Pentagram, for example, they'll include a piece of custom software that would actually allow anyone working with the design to create their own versions of it. And so I'm not sure of something that currently exists like off the shelf that would be able to do that, but you could definitely use processing to create something like that, where you would be able to track out a piece of type as it got smaller and then use the exporting functions to export like an SVG of that so that you could use it in whatever application you wanted to use it in.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you so much. And thank you, Juan Carlos, for bringing that up.
Yes, Juan Carlos, thank you. I'm glad, I thought Roy and Brad would be reading the chat room. My job was finished once I entered the classroom.
Oh, yeah, no, we were actually right now, we're like, so exactly what, I guess that was my job to moderate the questions.
But anyway, thank you all. It's wonderful to see everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. It's nice to see you all again.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
You guys.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
guys.
Good
Take
luck.
care.
Bye.
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 Thank you.